All right. So, greetings and salutations. I have no idea if this is working or not working, but welcome to this session on storytelling. We are talking about one day in 2050 and a day in 2050 where we are able to imagine perhaps climate futures. Let us see how we might be able to get a sense of what's happening. Now, let me see if I can see if anybody online, how we find those people, and how I get them engaged. Okay, so we have a couple people online. We have Tricky, Paula DeSantis, Nina, Michael Jackson, Joshua Hurtado from Mexico. Thank you all for joining. Sorry to be late. I have had a challenge getting on and actually also had an opportunity to just meet with some movie people. So today we're going to actually try to write a story. Thanks. Hi, Michael. How are you? Thanks for being here. I really want to use today to see if we can do a group story. I'm thinking that since there's so few of us, it might be good to have us in a different format. So if you don't mind, if you feel like coming online and helping to craft this story with me, they're not. Otherwise, I'll just have you stay on webinar. But if you want to have a chat, let's join me. So I like to start with a topic or something. I said we would do climate, but I've been very focused on space in the last several years. And space futures is very exciting because it's so much of an unknown. And as we know, with Space Force and other new technologies building, for me, I would like to see more people focus on thinking about what space might look like. I just got back from doing a presentation on a future in which I am proposing that we have a global space futures collaboratory. And in my fantasy reality, many people in the world are involved in kind of constructing and shaping how human futures in space might evolve by ensuring that their countries, which are, even though UN USA did not anticipate private sector, their countries, they have a say in what their countries do, and hopefully prevent us can turning space into another war zone. So does anybody want to talk about space, or is there something else that is a more burning topic that we can construct a narrative around? And meanwhile, let me just, I can bring up my slides, kind of run through again the proposal of how I see this happening. So let's can bring up my slides very quickly to just show you what it is. A very, very simple framework for helping you to just think about the future. So again, the idea is a day in 2050, and we want to slideshow from the beginning. Yeah, we want to very quickly just run through some of the basic things I think about when I'm thinking about writing a story. So the first thing I think about is asking people to think about the future they want or the future they fear. Most times I find people have a much more strong vision or emotional response to the future they fear. And it's a good place to start, because if you fear something, you're going to try your best to avoid it if you can. And certainly if we're trying to work with a client or a community, you want to prepare them to either avoid the future they fear, or if the future they fear comes to pass, to be able to bounce back and be more resilient. So that's the first thing. If you have a workshop, if you have an opportunity where you have done some scenarios and maybe the scenarios are wishy-washy, people still don't feel what you're talking about, turning the scenario into a story is a way to do that. And you could take an entry point as asking people that question the future they want or the future they fear. It's fairly simple and it's universal. If I haven't already gone over this, just very quickly, why story? Because I mean, the research has shown our brain lights up on stories, different parts of our brain light up, and really people recall and operate much more fluently in the field of stories. We know this because of how we respond to advertising. In fact, those 30-second advertisements convince us that if we would only drink this shake, we're going to be extremely slim and beautiful like the model Or if you could only wear this particular designer outfit, will be so desirable that everybody will fall in love with this. And we actually believe it and go to and spend gobbles of money trying to achieve the impossible. So stories are very powerful, and the advertising geniuses know that. So anyway, after we have this future with fear, we want to always get what I call an inciting incident. And that inciting incident could be something from today or something from the future. It really depends on what is easier for you to imagine. For some people, for whom the future is very hard to articulate, you might have an inciting incident be something from today. And this is where your signals and your drivers come in, because typically the future that somebody fears is something that they are projecting based on something that's happening now. Most times, of course, there are people like you and I who live a lot in the future. But for many people, most times, the future they fear is a projection of what they're seeing right now. So you might ask them, what made you think about that future? What is it that you're seeing now that makes you fear that evolution into that particular future? And that might be a good starting point to start off on your journey. I really like to use the hero's journey story form. Those of you who have studied Joseph Campbell know the basic outline. Okay, the hero has something that they want to go out and seek. In this case, we're trying to seek a future that is more beneficial to us. And so something incites the hero to set off on this journey of discovery. And along the way, they meet strangers, they meet friends, and some of the strangers are friends and some of them are antagonists. And this is how you build from a basic framework of storytelling, a simple arc of from here to there, or from there, 2050 back to here. So we're talking about 2050, and very quickly, what next? So on alternative, we started off, and some people talked about food and water scarcity-based war, impact of climate on the skills of futures, robots. Yesterday in our conversation, we didn't actually construct a story, but coming after the speaker, we're trying to think about what does a technology-driven society with AI look like? And we began to think through what does the AI future that is fearful look like versus what does the AI future will look like, want to look like. I have to tell you that during last year, I and a couple of colleagues entered the Future of Life competition. We didn't even make it to the top 20, but nonetheless, it was fun doing the exercises and really trying to construct a world from 2045. And I ended up realizing that I really was afraid of fake news. So I had a whole backstory and characters set in New York, and I constructed a very detailed company that would exist in the future that would help to solve the problem of having people like myself who really, really want to know we can trust our news source, be able to pay to join this people's consortium for free and fair news. So, and I really spent a lot of time thinking about it, using models of how public radio operates today in different parts of the world to drive my design process. But needless to say, we can add to this future/AI and the kind of where we are up to today. So again, I would love to hear from some of you. If you have an issue, an incited issue, so we can actually construct a mini story right now with who is in the room. So we need to have a protagonist. That's the person who wants something that's you, or in this case, it's us. And we can have an antagonist, or the situation itself could be an antagonist, or you could have actively other elements, other agents in the system under study who serve as your antagonist. In other words, they want to prevent you from having that. So what do they want? What is the future that your antagonist want versus what's the future that you want, your protagonist want? So I'm going to say we are the protagonist and they are the antagonist for the sake of this artificial experiment we're trying to create. All right. Most people are familiar with backcasting. And so the traditional backcasting approach, you can go from 250 backwards to 225, or from 25. Some people like to go forward. I don't think it really matters. I think that it's sometimes more powerful if you start from the future and go backwards, because typically your brain kind of sometimes shuts down if you start from now. You cannot constrain your imagination too much if you start from now and project outwards. So I think especially for people who are just getting used to telling stories, it's really better to ask, kind of thrust them into the future, let them be uncomfortable if necessary, because I mean, change is not comfortable. You want them to get used to being uncomfortable. So it's actually good to thrust them into a future that they fear or that they want, and then have them backcast the thing that would have to happen for them not to get to the future they fear, or the thing that would have to happen for them to get to the future they want. So either way, that's a backcasting approach, backward or forward. But I prefer, especially with people who are new to storytelling, to do backcasting. It is very challenging because people always tend to want to say, we will be doing this or we will be doing that. And to get them to just stand up in the future, pick a time, imagine themselves at a certain age, imagine what their family will be doing, imagine what kind of food they're eating, and to really thrust them to immerse themselves in the story world is sometimes very challenging. But I have had some success in having people make that breakthrough in their mindset and make the shift from standing in the present and looking out at the future versus standing in the future and then saying, how did I get here? So things including your story form. What is the system in which your problem is embedded? So if it's a climate system, what else is adjacent to that? If it's a food project, what's adjacent to food? I mean, nothing stands on its own. So everything in your system, if it's a food problem, if it's an AI problem, it's a climate problem, it's a water problem, is attached to something else. So always look at the systems in which your problem story is embedded. Then I use the word metric for shortcut, but really it's about how are you going to, what will constitute success for you, right? So metric of success. It doesn't have to be actually a metric like 5 people, but you don't want to have like a nebulous thing like you ask questions of people what they want and they say world peace. Well, what's that? I mean, that's a nebulous idea. World peace is, what does that mean? When the world is at peace, there's still like 50 skirmishes happening and people going to jail every day for murder. So what is world peace? So we need to have a little more tangible description of what success looks like, so we can help people really make their story rich and fruitful and able to help you excavate lessons from the story process. The agents we talked about already, the agents are the protagonists and antagonists. The resilience is what you want to do. You know, like when you hear a folk tale and you say, and then so happened, and then Red Riding Hood did so and so, and then the big great wolf came, and then Red Riding Hood found. So and then some of the resilience that in the real world, something happens, a hurricane, something happens, your business crashes, something happens, they change the rules on you, and you suddenly find that this grand idea you have doesn't work anymore. Resilience is the things you go through to keep going in your story. The story is continually moving to a resolution, good, bad, or indifferent. But the resilience is the fact that you pick up yourself off the ground as the protagonist and keep going till you get to the end. And finally, technology. Obviously, if you're telling any story today, technology is going to be a part of it. Think about what technology you might want to reference, or if you're doing something about the future of technology itself, there might be other technologies that are impinging on the success of your technology that you can reference in making your story have texture and depth and all the other things that make it exciting for people to hear or to read. So this is a story I wrote and I've used for different speeches I've done. Imagine 2050 is UN International Flight Day. And I'm imagining that because we have not been good at coming up with air traffic control rules for the world, and by air traffic, I mean space traffic. So we have satellites going up, we have space tourism happening, and people are doing all sorts of things. And in this headline, what we have is the idea that we have signal jamming with satellites controlling air traffic. And so basically the world is on shut down. No planes can move until this model that is built by the Global Space Futures Collaboratory, which is my fictional organization, is helping to solve the problem, because there's no global protocol on space traffic management that has changed. So we managed to get one in 2030, but it's not been updated. And since 2030, we've had a lot of new satellites launched in low Earth orbit, as well as satellites launched in cislunar orbit. Now, all of this doesn't happen, but how do I get a story like this? I'm looking at what's happening in space, the conversation around sustainability, and the fact that technically speaking, a lot of us are concerned in the space community about how do we ensure space sustainability. And I'm assuming by then, given all the companies trying to do business in the cislunar space, we might have 50 satellites orbiting or what do you call it? Don't know, international space stations orbiting the moon, because so many companies are trying to do that to earn a living. I just came from a space conference and I was amazed at the number of companies talking about cislunar orbit. So it's really going to be a crowded environment up there. I see somebody is asking a question. And of course, eventually we get to the end of our story. So yeah, Mike, I'll send it to you in a minute. So yeah, so these slides are just a way of us beginning to think through how we might shape a story process. And at first I was like, how do I teach people to do what I do? It was very hard for me to take it out of my head and put it on paper. And so I would really love your feedback as well as Mike. You would like a copy of the slides. Why is that? Is there something about the slides you like? Something about the slides you don't like? How do you find them useful? And how do you intend to use them? Very helpful for me to know, if this is helping people to think about the story making process in a new way, or how I can strengthen it so I can really help people do a better job of turning their dry scenarios into something that's tangible. So here we are, 2050. I'd love to get from you, those of you who are here, some ideas about a story you'd like to hear. And once upon a time, there was Goldilocks or the bear. Michael, is there something you'd like to hear? I'm not sure if anybody else is on at this time listening. Paula, Nina, Tricky, if you'd like to come and speak live, please feel free. There's no need for such a small group of us to just be working on the thing. So if you want to speak, I can move you over and let's really have a nice participatory session. I really want this to be a participatory session. So let me know if you'd like to move over. Just put up your hand and I'll move you over into the room with me so we can have a more robust conversation. Joshua Tada says, the structure you outlined is helpful because antagonisms and thinking about, thank you, Michael, thinking about conflicting goals with other organizations and how they might evolve toward the future is relevant for strategy. So Joshua, do you have a particular sector that you're working in that I could help you tell a story, just with the framework, so to demonstrate for you how the framework could work? Do you have a particular topic you'd like to talk about, Joshua? I'm going to bring it over as well. Do you have a particular topic you'd like to talk about? Your PhD on degrowth? Absolutely. All right. Let's get cracking. Let's have a fantastic participatory session. All right. So Paula, degrowth. I really like the degrowth concept because it's so, what do I call the word? It seems very impractical to talk about like when you hear the word degrowth, what do you think? So Joshua, when you say degrowth, let's start with that. When you say degrowth,
Claire.
Thank you. When you say degrowth, Joshua, what are you thinking about? What is the future you want while you're doing a doctorate on degrowth?
Well, because I come from an international relations and political science background,
Yes.
I focus mostly on the institutional level, and I'm thinking, and also organizations. So, for example, I'm thinking more about social and solidarity economy organizations. Let's focus on big corporations, maybe a different view of what the state is integrating, I don't know, concepts from participatory democracy, and you know, more focus on perhaps public policies that aim to reduce unnecessary production and consumption, something along those lines. Mhm.
So when I hear the word degrowth as a not economist, I'm very familiar with international development. I've worked for 30 years in that space. And I know we're talking about the fact, okay, growth is not sustainable. More growth is a cancer. But how do you translate that into really practical stories that can explain to the average person who is not an economist, or the average person who is, more or less intelligent, but it's like these terms mean nothing. All they know is that something isn't working. How would you explain what degrowth, if it's successful, looks like? I personally, I'm going to answer the question I asked. I personally fell in love with Kate Raworth's donut economics as a framework for thinking about development. And I don't call it donut economics because I think donuts are sugary and bad for the system. So I call it lifesaver economics. Yes, Paula, you have a question. I'm going to come to you. So I call it lifesaver economics, but I think that diagram.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
Her stuff is absolutely wonderful.
yeah, because that image of this circle, right? First of all, it brings to mind the idea we're trying to move towards a circular economy, right? And then the planetary boundaries on the outside, and then the social boundaries on the inside. So when I hear a degrowth, not being an expert, immediately I am thinking, okay, we're going to come up with some new metrics of what is success for a company, what is success for a country that's setting policy. Because everybody says, oh, we have to grow our economy, we've got to grow our economy. Yeah, but to what end, right? If we grow an economy and say there's inequality, what is the point of growth, right? If it's not providing more equal and more lives of flourishing. So when I hear degrowth, I tend to jump to, oh, something that looks like the lifesaver route that says we're gonna grow enough, but not so much that we outstrip our boundaries, and in such a way as to make sure that more people have lives of well-being. So let's look at 2050 then. One trigger is that we know that the EU and some of the countries in the OECD have been looking at well-being for some time, right? It's still not yet accepted, but you could write a story as somebody working a PhD on, degrowth and say, okay, it's 2050, and we know that the experiments that some communities have had in applying the lifesaver economics has worked. And maybe in a country like, I'm going to pick Wales because Wales has a futures commission. You can say the experiment launched by Wales back in 2020, whenever they started their program, has spread to about 50% of the countries in the world. And many countries have been testing futures commission, not at a national scale like Wales, but in cities like Atlanta in Georgia, like Leeds in England. So you might pick up some. Now you begin to see how I've taken a reality and said a very plausible possible extension is that signal change triggered other people who think like you, other young people who are doing their PhDs, to say, you know what, I'm not going to do a PhD and put on a shelf. I'm actually going to start a movement. That's a very plausible thing because many young people are social entrepreneurs. So again, it's another signal that's happening that you can put into your story. And all of a sudden, your brain is going to start going, oh my God, this is very exciting. Let me keep going, right? So you're trying to get a 2050 where your degrowth theory, let's say you're working on a particular policy framework, right? Your degrowth theory now has a system in which it can be embedded. Your degrowth theory is not going to stand alone. It's going to stand in a system where there are people in this lifesaver movement, there are people in the circular economy movement, there are people in the economic justice movement that are going to bounce upon your degrowth policy that could allow you to have agents of support to move forward into reality. On the other hand, you're gonna have the traditional status quo people that said, we don't care what you say, we have power, and there's no way we're gonna loosen our stranglehold because we've got to keep on making profit, 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 profit. Which we all know, if India and other countries and Africa is going to be industrialized and modernized to the same level of consumption as the US and Europe, we're going to be totally toast, especially the US where I live, where waste is prevalent, right? Fast fashion, fast clothes, fast food, fast furniture, you name it. And so landfills are being sky high. So let's go now to 2050. What would a headline sound like for you? If you were to just throw up there and just throw something in the pot, what does a successful headline from 2050 look like for you? I've given you a jump off point, but I want you now to tell me something that you think, I'd really like to see this happen in 2050. If I had to talk about going to a climate conference in 2050 or the UN conference on sustainable development in New York in 2050, what are you seeing in that world that makes you feel that your doctoral dissertation was not a waste of time? What is happening?
If I were to think about a title, I would say something about maybe thriving bioregions and ecovillages or something like that.
Thriving what?
Bioregions and ecovillages.
Hold on, I'm not hearing.
Let me write it.
Yeah, please write it. Thank you.
He's saying bioregions.
Yes.
Thriving biorhythms. Oh.
No, thriving bioregions and
bioregions. Got you.
Yeah.
Fabulous. All right. This is exciting. Yeah. All right. I love it.
And what was the other question? Sorry.
No, because it's practical. I mean, we're not gonna have like a utopia where everybody's singing Kumbaya in 2050. That's not a reality, right? You gotta make your story plausible. You basically want to say, okay, we have not solved all the problems in the world, and the whole world is not, doing circular economy, but there are regions of the world where you have eco villages, people are living within their means, they're doing a zero-sum game. And it's these thriving bioregions and eco-villages that have allowed us to escape the worst of climate change, for example, right? Now, where do we want to have these? Yes.
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure, of course.
So based on everything that I was hearing and looking at it from the perspective of the donut model or the planetary thriving model, and then not using the term degrowth per se, but maybe regenerative cycling or regenerative spiraling. That allows for then the input and the output to then circle around, say, like a Mobius or infinity loop, so that there is no sense of needing to use resources in an infinite way, in an infinite growth way, which is just not sustainable, but using a more sustainable regenerative perspective and modeling for resources. Perhaps looking also at how, if you want to supplant the notion of growth of planetary resources for inner development and inner growth, there are new models of inner growth, inner development through the inner development goals. It's a project that I'm involved in right now, in fact, which is kind of incipient around the world, which informs how people grow internally to become better people, more conscious of the planet, more aware of the symbiosis of their existence with the rest of the living planet.
Interesting about this, not to cut you, I'm going off topic here, but it's okay, we're having a conversation, right? We'll come back to the story. So regenerative engineering is becoming the norm in 2050, right? So let's say we agree with that, right? But I just want to make a sidebar, Paul, if you don't mind, because I just found out about this, inner development model.
Mhm.
And I have to tell you, my response was a little bit like, are these people for real? I mean, let me tell you why I said that. Because when you look at the development model, I remember growing up in Jamaica, right? And back in
Mhm.
the day, we would carry our cloth bags to the supermarket, and then we were told
Mhm.
that it's so backward. We're backward. We must move into the modern age and get a plastic bag. Okay, now we're banning the plastic bags. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering, like, I'm very intrigued by the fact when I looked on the website, all of
Mhm.
these trainings were for the developing countries. And I'm like, who are these people to be telling people from developing countries that we have to be inner developed when in fact we already had it and then we were
Uh-huh.
told we're backward. So I
You
think that whole network needs to have a wake-up call and a come to Jesus moment with people like me to bring them into
uh-huh.
some reality about the sort of
Uh-huh.
again, it's intellectual hubris that's
Yeah.
imposed upon from the global south north to the global south. Anyway, back to my point.
Well, I'm glad that you said that because if actually that's what's happening with the return of the survey to gather your opinions. And because there is no one size fits all, and that's why, and it's a process of inner development in evolution, and no one culture has the patent on what inner development looks like. We need everybody's opinion on that. So please input your opinions into the global survey so that it can inform the next
So
iteration.
please reach out to me on LinkedIn so we can have a conversation.
We will.
I
Anyway,
love
so the
it.
point that I'm trying to get at is that I grew up doing inner development even before this framework was in existence.
Exactly.
Lots of people. This is not new, but it is articulated in a way that it's supposed. The purpose is to allow people to sort of look at it and say, "Oh yeah, it is important to do inner development to be able to know how to work together properly
No
and
question about
collectively
it.
and aligned so that we can work together on goals of common interest, like
I'm
the."
going to agree with you. You know why? I
Mhm,
work in an international organization.
mhm.
I was punished for being an outlier, right? And I'm saying to myself,
Ditto.
these jokers are talking about international development. And it was very challenging at the time to find any kind of leadership training for people who work in these spaces. So I wrote a paper and presented
Mhm,
at the Salzburg seminar about
mhm,
evolutionary leadership for the global commons and the common good. But
mhm,
back to 2050, if so,
mhm,
let's say that the headlines reach that, okay, bioregions and eco-village abound in over 40% of small towns and cities under 1 million people, as well
mhm,
as even in some small islands dotted in the Pacific, Caribbean, and Africa, who have gone wholesale into using regenerative engineering to design their smart islands, smart communities, smart villages. Good.
mhm.
This happened, I'm going to put your part in now. This happened because back in 2024, following a
Mhm.
global survey which was done by the Inner Development Movement, which was very passionate about moving the global sustainability goals forward, a
Mhm.
group of people decided to craft from that survey an ongoing story making collaboratory that
Yeah.
picked stories from people that were writing stories about their reality and how changing their mind about what was important to them led
Mhm.
to their communities developing that model and electing officials and designing systems to support the transition to becoming eco-smart villages and communities. We
Mhm.
can say the going was rough, especially the first 3 years. There are many people who dismissed it as utopian, impossible, people with woo-woo ideas. But nevertheless, the band of global planetary defense guardians, as they call themselves secretly and jokingly, pressed on, right? And slowly it moved because by doing the work as leaders and learning how to see the other, building on in my case, I'm going to put my book in there now, building in the Smart Futures framework designed by Dr. Clare Nelson, more people were able to find themselves, find where they belonged in the picture. Nobody was forced to take on anybody's version of it, but more people were able to use these frameworks that have been designed to allow them to find the best way of them being and bringing their vision. And we began to break down the silos where it was no longer water people, energy people, food people, education people, health people working across purposes. But by creating these collaboratories, the Smart Futures collaboratories, this is my big dream now, we were able to build in the lessons that each group was working with and to create the conditions for this to take off. So by 2020, my God, all of a sudden, there was a flourishing of activity. And between 2028 and 2040, you saw an exponential growth as people woke up to the reality that the potential of doing regenerative engineering and circular economy was actually quite real, was not far-fetched, and even major corporations began to quietly change the metrics they use for success as pressure was brought to bear. All right, it sounds like a fantasy, but is it totally a fantasy, or could that actually be a story that, if written, could trigger change? Because I believe that change is triggered by some of the stories that you actually read. So I'm going to hear from Paula. Does my story sound totally fantasy, could never happen, or are there elements of things that I have mentioned that make it a possibility for you that it could actually go something like that?
I would drink that Kool-Aid. That's the sort of story that gives me hope. And apart from the fact that, you know, you're looking at it from collaboration perspective, we're looking at it as well from when you're thinking of growth, you switch the model on from planetary material growth to regenerative of regeneration of planetary resources. And the growth actually happens on the inside out, outside in, people, and people working for the planet. And so, and people realizing they are the planet. And so that symbiotic relationship is then this growth. That's the growth in the awareness. And so that's where the degrowth, material degrowth, personal regrowth model appears.
The consciousness growth, consciousness, consciousness growth. We let go of some of the lizard brain tendencies that have processes, and we don't do nuclear weapons in space. One of my biggest fears. So, Joshua, as you hear that story, does that resonate with you at all, or you think it's totally stupidity? Well, I'm not bringing our story. We're going to go to make the story happen.
That's a hopeful bedtime story for sure.
I think it is inspiring, but because again I come from the international relations and political science background, I think I keep thinking about possible obstacles and possible structural barriers and organizational antagonists that might block that inspirational vision. But I don't disregard it. I think it's a potent, let's say, a potent vision to move towards. It's just that I keep thinking more about the conflict side of it.
So let's think about the obstacles. What are those obstacles, and how can we get to the organizational whys to get them to realize, if they just shift a little bit their mindset, if there's a slight transformation in the way that they see it, just look in a different direction towards the why of their own existence, that can actually change their way of looking at it. So name me one of the obstacles or barriers that you're noticing right away.
Well, I
Um,
think one of
yes,
the
please.
obstacles for me would be like the monetary system, right? We have a lot of what you call the word baggage in the monetary system as it currently exists, right? And so
Unless we adopt a cryptocurrency system or a non-fiat currency system. So that's already in the works now. I can see that by 2050 being the norm as opposed to being the fringe. So what
well,
do you
it
think,
depends
Joshua?
because suppose you meet upon a bunch of Stone Age people like myself. I'm a Stone Age person when it comes to cryptocurrency. I keep on saying to people, what will happen when the power goes out? I'm gonna say, oh please, what are you talking about? You have a charge card that works even when the power is out. I mean, yeah, but if you're saying cryptocurrency, the money is actually the node of the internet, not a real plastic somewhere or gold standard somewhere. What's gonna happen when the power goes out? Suppose we have a solar flare and it knocks all our systems out for like 3 weeks. What's gonna happen to all that cryptocurrency? And nobody can tell me. So I'm like not that. So I'm seeing the other old people like yourself who like, I'm not sure about this cryptocurrency. It sounds nice on paper, but what if, because it's actually at least paper money, you can have paper, it's money, but how do you address those issues? But I hear you. We do have to put in our story these kinds of real constraints, these kind of real challenges, the fact that we have a monetary system that's old and yes, cryptocurrency. Now, some communities are toying with local currency, which might be a way around that question, right? So we can forget cryptocurrency, we just do local. So if we say, okay, the local paper money or local buttons or local shells or whatever, or some kind of bartering system, which is not really money, but it's just a bartering system, but they keep track of it, then maybe we can get around that. Those people in the village who are like me and who are older say, forget that, I'm not gonna do that. I want to have real money. So for every obstacle that we put up and every counter argument, the beauty of story is that you can really have a community think through it and hopefully come out with a resolution. Maybe not one that everybody would agree with, but one that everybody would agree to disagree with, if it's where I'm going with that. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, none of us know the future anyway. We're just trying to help make sense of what is emerging and help people able to think critically about shaping the future they want. So I think it's okay that Paula said what she said, and I said, I'm not feeling that. Let's come up with something else. Because that's exactly what will happen in real life if you're going to have a conversation like this with any group of people. So Paula said, challenges, I found one so far. Another challenge I would say would be the bad guys. And the bad guys, well, I would say, I'm just thinking of some small islands, for example. I mean, it's people making a lot of money off the system being broken. Let's take, for example, people in the counterfeit drug world, right? Let's say your community or your country, they said bio, whatever. Let's say that your country discovered that they had all these wonderful plants that, if grown in the right conditions and taken care of the right way, could really provide a lot of, like a medicine cabinet, right? You might find that the bad guys have been making money on counterfeit drugs, or pharmaceuticals might get very upset that you now no longer need them, right? And find a way to try to destroy all these beautiful, precious plants. That is actually very scary if you think about it. So I'd be like, okay, let's not say this in public. Please, let's not say this in public. That's where I would go immediately. Let's not put any ideas in people's heads because this is a bad idea. Don't get it out there. But at the same time, it's a reality that something like this could occur. You could have a community saying, wait a minute, we have this plant that if we drink this tea, we will never, ever, ever have the flu again. And somebody will say, we got to destroy those plants because we got to sell our flu medicine. How do you counter that?
I don't know. Maybe Joshua has an answer or Michael has an answer. Michael's been very quiet.
Well, Michael is plotting to see how his AI is going to take this story and rewrite it. That AI, Michael is plotting AI take over the world.
Can't hear you, Michael. Your microphone's closed.
Yeah,
We can
please
hear you,
unmute
Michael.
Michael. Yeah.
Well, it could, but unfortunately, I've got some urgent business that I'm happy to attend to, so I am listening, but not able to really contribute at the moment.
Yes, that's okay. So, but I was saying that Michael is trusting his AI to kind of take over the story and take it off in a different direction. So here's a question. If the AI writes a story and you know it's written by AI, does it make it any more real or less real for you? What is your emotional response to an AI story about the future? Do you feel that it's more scary for you, or do you feel it's more accepted, or do you just use it as another tool? Does anybody have a question on that?
Well, I think it depends on the question you ask the AI.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask the AI for a peaceful statement, it will give you a peaceful statement, and if you ask it for a conflictual statement, it will give you a conflictual one. And it also depends on the prompt you put in. So if you tell the prompt, I only want to listen to conflict, or I only want to listen to peace, it will do that. Or of course, you could ask it for both. Yeah, which is what I tend to do. I tend to put in the trend and the counter trend, or the collapse, or the growth, etc., etc. So you get two conflicting statements, from which you can then decide which one you think is the one that you should go with. And I'll always finish them up by asking about what should you do to mitigate the risks, and how to seize the opportunities. But the ability for the machine to write stories is fantastic, and very, very quickly. It takes 30 seconds in my system. Once you've put what you want to know about in there, it'll write 7 or 8 scenarios about any particular time in the future, any particular country, any particular topic. It'll do all of that without humans having to write them. What I find interesting about that is that the machine can write better stories than most humans. Because it's using natural language and human language, and it's really good at that. It can write amazingly beautiful, well-constructed stories faster than humans can write them. And so that gives us back the opportunity to use those stories to then add our own human thinking into it and say, what if the machine is right, or what if it's wrong, and what would we do about it? So it moves us away from having to write the stories to thinking about what would we do if these stories came true.
And in part, in part, I agree with what you said in terms of it being an aid to the story writing process. I don't agree that it writes beautifully. I do think that it can come up with some scenarios that you wouldn't immediately come up with, because it does so in a very quick manner based on all of the access to all of the world trained material that it's been fed, which is a faster process than our own immediate access to all that same information, and us to process it in a creative sort of way. As a language professional, I have to think that
we'd have to disagree with that, Paula, because I'd have to disagree with that, Paula, because I did say at the beginning that the humans put the constraints, or the opportunities to loosen the constraints in at the beginning. So the machine, obviously, if you just ask the machine what's the future in 2050 of space, it's not got enough information to be able to give you anything other than a very raw scenario. But if the humans put in some information at the beginning that trains the machine around the things they want, and put some context in, which the machine can do, it writes beautiful stories, and it doesn't hallucinate. The only thing it does do is I've trained the machine that when it's something about the past or the present, then it has to be supported by sources and good sources. But
Which
when it
machine
gets
are you
into the
using?
future, sorry.
Which one are you using?
Well, it's our own purpose-built one, but it runs on ChatGPT, Claude 2, and Anthropic. It's got
Okay.
3 robots inside our own system. It's a
Okay.
purpose-built system. It's not just
Okay.
going to ChatGPT and asking it a question.
Okay.
The
No,
machine will give
of
you a
course
complete
not.
answer in 1 hour. It takes an hour
Yeah.
for the machine to run it.
Yeah.
So when you do that, the only real thing is that the machine sometimes does not get the formatting right, which we're gradually figuring out how to make that perfect. But I've told the machine that unless I tell you otherwise, you're not allowed to tell me preposterous things or improbable things. And then there are parts of the system that allow it to say, I do want you here to tell me about deviant thinking. I do want you to tell me about preposterous ideas, etc., etc. So the machine obeys that quite well. It obeys that quite well.
And you know, I can understand now how your system might do that. I've written things, co-written things with AI bots, and I give it free reign. But I don't like necessarily the output of all of the contextual information that I put in. I prefer to write my own based on some of the suggestions provided. So I do so in an iterative fashion for scenario building.
Yes.
But I will have to say, as a language professional myself, I prefer my own writing. I think there's more creativity in the way in which we can wordsmith as in originality, the way that people can wordsmith, because it is our language. We're not learning it in the same way that that machine is. It is
Yes, true.
Our native thought process, whereas that machine is still learning it. And maybe at one time it might become native to that machine, but for the time being, I dispute that.
Well, the other side of the coin is you should know that it's possible for anybody to write a scenario and put it into the machine, and then for the robot to read that scenario and take it and say, here's why I think that scenario might be right or wrong. So it's both. It's both. It's a very nice word. It's a very nice word. The collaboratory is a nice word. The robot's collaborating. It's not telling you that this is going to be the future. It's collaborating, and you can either write your own scenario and then ask the robot to respond to it, or you can ask the robot to tell you what a scenario is, and then you could then take it away and improve upon it if you wish to.
Exactly. And
so
I think that's the final piece.
I don't have the same problem you do because I'm using it all the time, and so are our clients.
Let me just say something though. I think maybe one potential utility I would say of a machine-enabled storytelling. I personally am biased towards humans using their brain, especially since these days we don't have more opportunity. But one of the challenges humans have is with looking at second and third order consequences of their decision making, right? And this is why this come back to the original story, which is a degrowth framework. If we're trying to make degrowth as a construct accessible to more people and really have it move from what I call a very academic, high-flung idea to a practical construct that NGOs can organize around and community-based organizations can organize around, then we've got to find a way to help people see potential second and third order consequences of making choices around utilities or utilizing things in ways that, you know, are just deleterious. And so when a scientist does these fantastic models of, you know, the water table being decreased, and then the average politician walks around and shakes their head looking wisely, and they know what the hell the scientist just said, which they don't, right? But they look wisely and, you know, yes, we agree. And then it goes off and do something different because they want to be elected next year. How are we going to find a way to tell stories in a way that gets people to recognize this is foolishness, it's not going to work. If you do it, it's going to impact your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, because these are other factors that you have not thought about that are next door to your choice. And I think we as futurists who have to find a way to convey ideas, a more wholesome, holistic perspective of the emerging or potentially impending futures to people who are trusting us to help them see more clearly, may have to, Paula, unfortunately for me and you, may have to bend a little bit sometimes to use tools like a story spouting machine to help us very rapidly process a question that we may have thought about before we went into the room. And because we don't know enough of the science behind the question, then we're gonna have to go to the machine and say, okay, here's the reality. Down the road, we have this much rain, this much river, this much whatever. What could happen? And therefore, we now improve our ability to craft even our own constructed story out of our own head. If you see where I'm going with it.
Let me use a different example, Paula.
Yes.
I would regard
listen,
myself
I agree with you. Research assistants.
No, let me just make my example, because
quite
I think it's a good one. I think it's a good one. When I was a young man, I really enjoyed woodwork, and I liked making furniture and all that sort of stuff, and repairing my house and so on and so on. But as I gradually rose up the corporate tree to the point where I became a chief executive, I had no time to do woodwork, and my tools used to travel around the world in a box, and never came out while I was overseas for many years. Finally, about 3 years ago, I thought I wasn't going to do any more foresight, and I began using my tools again. But the fact is that the tools have moved on amazingly. They're nearly all digital tools now, and I'm having to relearn how to do woodwork using digital tools, which is fantastic, because these machines that I now have are incredible. They can do stuff in 5 minutes that would take me hours to do, and they give me much more craft over what I'm doing. So the same thing applies. The same thing applies to AI. I've been using AI for 10 years, and it's not that AI is not going to take away the human agency. It's not going to take away the human wisdom, but it is a tool that we can all use. So when I want to write a contract, for instance, when I want to write a scenario, I can ask the machine to do that for me, and it's giving me my first draft, of which I can then improve upon it with some human agency in it, right? Or I can write a scenario, which I've done many times, put it in the machine and say, improve this for me, and it will. Yeah. So I think we need to be thinking about the idea that AI is a companion rather than a dictator of what's going to happen, and that we can use it for good in both in terms of improving our own work, and at the same time asking it to do work for us that we just didn't even think about. Yeah. And
Well,
that's
I
where
agree.
I'm coming from.
I think that there's all sorts of spaces for automated work that sometimes is slog work or drudge work, in the sense that it takes time to really gather together facts and figures, and sometimes put together conclusions based on a whole lot of data, more than what necessarily our human time permits, or maybe the urgency of the situation permits. And I'm all for using AI tools for that. I think they're great research assistants in that regard. I just think that the ultimate gaze needs to be human, because we're looking at human impact. And so I think that essentially people need to be driven by human driven stories in the woodwork of, not to use a pun, but in the woodwork of our crafting these stories and these narratives, and in the convincing of our politicians. It's definitely helpful to use automated tools, AI tools, any other assistance or leverage that we can get to get the information quickly and safely and ethically, and accurate as we can get to the point in time in which we're using it. And then at the end, look it over and make sure everything is in place so that our story actually has the impact to change people's hearts and minds and their will to change.
Yep. Well, I'm speaking at 3:30 Paris time and showing people my model. So maybe you'll be able to make that meeting, and you'll see that it has humans built in at the beginning and at the end, and the meat in the sandwich is the AI.
So 3:30 at Paris time would make it,
I don't know
I'm
where
sorry.
you are.
No, I'm in Canada. So, that's a 6 hour difference from me right now. So what time is it where you are right now? Is it 6
Oh,
in
I'm
the
in the
morning?
Philippines. I'm in the
Oh,
Philippines. It's midday. It's midday. But 3:30
oh,
in Paris is 3:30 in Paris will be about, I think it'll be about 8 hours difference to no, Canada. Are you in Toronto or Ottawa?
Toronto. Yeah,
Um, I think it's about 6 hours difference. So
it
therefore
is.
it will be 9:30 in your morning. Is that right?
Yes, but that would
Yes.
be, yes, it would be. Okay, 3:30 in the afternoon, you meant. Sure, I can be
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've had a very robust discussion. I've certainly have gone over my half an hour, but I enjoyed it. Michael Jackson was very nice to see you. We need to catch up. Let's plan to meet up one day next week, perhaps when you have some time. I
Yeah,
have,
I've sent you my email address, and if you could send me your slides,
yes,
I missed half of it because of this emergency that I've got going on the other phone.
yeah,
So if I can read the slides again, and then we talk, Claire, maybe there's some things we can do together.
yes, that'd be fun.
Now,
Paula,
Okay.
Michael, we're already connected via LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn. I'm the only one with this name in LinkedIn. So,
Yeah,
Joshua,
I know
hablo
your name.
español un poquito.
so
So,
Joshua and Paula also, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm gonna look for you guys. And oh, my name is not there, so I'm gonna put it in the chat. I'm this, I suppose. And by the way, I am the editor at large for Human Futures magazine.
uh-huh,
And so
uh-huh.
I'd love to have you consider writing an essay. We want to do the year 2050 as a special compendium for the closing thing of Human Futures this year. So Joshua, if you feel like putting up 500 words, our shortest essay is now around 500 words, 500, a little bit more words.
Okay.
And then we also have, you can do a feature stories about 1,500 words. But we
Interesting.
take, and we take other alternate forms that you might want to be writing as well. We try to mix it up. So we would like articles by November the 25th, and Human Futures will continue to ride. Also, I would love to, let me see if I can find before I go. I was trying to create a Web 2.0 site, and I'd love for Human Futures. I'm going to put the link in here if I can find it, so that you guys hopefully can check out the Human Futures Lab on Topia. Maybe I can actually find it right now.
Okay.
On Topia, I was trying to, they wanted to use, and they were like, oh, nobody's gonna go there. I said, probably not, because people in this group can get so stuck in their old ways of doing things. And I'm like, well, I don't care. We're supposed to be futurists. We need to start doing things
Yeah.
differently. And so I
You
created
know,
that.
Claire,
Yes.
I was just gonna say that what attracted me to this session was the fact that your title, One Day in 2050, is actually the name of um, a, it's an organization that has written some futures, climate futures narratives over the last
I have a
few
story
years.
in that. I have a story in that. And the reason I reached out to them was because I said, wait a minute, I was thinking of doing something like that, but since you're doing it, I won't bother. I'll just write something in your
Yeah,
thing. So I
yeah, it
wrote
was
something
good.
in it.
So did you write one of the days in the a
Yes,
day and
yes.
okay.
I
So
can't.
the ecofascism publication has one of my stories in it.
Okay, awesome.
And
So
it's actually it talks about bioregional Minka communities, Joshua. It's a Quechua
Mhm.
narrative.
Perfect.
so it's
I'll
the
have a look.
Human
Thank
Future
you.
Sandbox on Topia. The link is in there. So if you feel
Oh,
like
lovely.
around there, I want to actually build out that world, and see if we can't have people use it when they feel like, for WFSF, can use it. People like yourself who want to maybe meet up with somebody and do something. If you want to actually put more content in, and we can make a little library, we can make libraries for each year if we'd like. So give it some thought. I'm thinking also that at some point in our next human futures. We used to do human futures salons when I was more ambitious. But then people were like, oh, different time zones, we can't do this. But maybe in the future we can meet up on Topia rather than on Zoom, right? And hang around and have a virtual beer and see how we can
Yes.
make things work. So thank you all for coming.
You know what? Time zones are not really complicated. It's just a matter of using the right tool to schedule it. You know, I mean, if you live in Australia and you live in North America, it's still possible. You just need to be able to figure out what is the edge of what's possible for you to the edge of what's possible for the next person.
That's what
So.
I've tried to do. I can't say I've been successful. Joshua, I'm online here on LinkedIn, so I could find you before I hang up here. Are you there?
Let me see where my LinkedIn is.
Yeah, I'm not finding you.
I should have it somewhere here.
Let me see if I can find Paula.
Just type in my name like
I
you see
found
it.
you.
Yeah, I'm the only one.
Yes, I'm gonna put connect. Okay. So you can accept me when you get up tomorrow.
Sure.
Go back online. All right, so I just sent you a request to connect. I'm already connected to Michael so I can reach him on email. I think he changed his email address though. And then
Claire,
Joshua,
what's your last name?
LinkedIn.
Joshua, I'm gonna just join you right now. So again,
Claire, what's your last name?
it's Nelson.
Nelson. Okay. And is it CLAIR or CLARE?
CLAIRE.
Okay.
So I'm gonna send you a pending to connecting from WF750.
Gotcha. Okay. Right here.
It is great. So Joshua, if you ever need someone to read your to run your ideas about your degrowth thing in the future, feel free to reach out to me because
Thank you very much. You're very kind.
I'm very curious about this degrowth stuff.
Great. Thank you.
So I look forward to talking to you again. And Michael has changed his email to preempt.life. Yeah, preempt.life, Mike at preempt.life.
Shaping Tomorrow now for 3 years. I thought I'd retired, but then Shaping Tomorrow called me in December and said the GPTs are coming and we'd like you to write a strategy. Would you come out of retirement and do it? So I said, well, I'll do it, but I'll write it on the basis that I'm going to write it as though I'm going to put Shaping Tomorrow out of business, which they weren't very happy about. And I said, and then I'm going to teach you how to become that organization. So when I'd written the story, they didn't like the story very much. And I said, well, you want to carry on doing what you're doing? And they said, yes. I said, so I'm going to do something entirely different. So that I'm going to present that at 3:30, which is a global process for people to be able to talk to each other, figure out their lives, and be able to contribute to what our clients want. So, but I have told them when I get this running and it's successful, they can have a link at Shaping Tomorrow, and they've already agreed that they're going to give me stuff and I'm going to give them stuff. So the two organizations are still working together, but I'm going down the route of decision intelligence, and they're going down the route of strategic foresight. It's okay, it's fine. So that's why I'm back in the game.
Thank you so much for a really good discussion. I enjoyed it, and I'm enjoying meeting some new people. And let's keep on telling those stories and making the world a better place. Take care.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.